Hello everyone, my name is Mike and today we're continuing Sabaton week and we're checking out Sabaton's White Death. So yeah, the White Death, going off of the title, I couldn't actually find an official video on the Sabaton's YouTube channel, so I'm just going off of a lyric video that I could find. But given the title White Death, I can't think of any other video that this will be about other than Simo Hayha, whose nickname was the White Death, who's probably one of the most famous snipers ever. Certainly in the Second World War, I think the only sniper during the Second World War that is comparable to him would be probably Yakov Pavlov, who fought in Stalingrad and Pavlov's house. But Simo Hayha, for me, certainly probably is the most famous sniper in history. Famous for the Winter War and stuff like that when the Soviet Union invaded Finland. But again, as always, I don't know what this song is going to be about, so I'm just going to let the video play, or the lyrics play in this case, and try and fill in the gaps where I can, and, let's go. Looking forward to this one, because Simo Hayha is a really, interesting person to me. Okay, so that's the first verse and chorus done. So yeah, so as that first verse kind of said, I suppose, I don't know if I assume it's on purpose because it's Sabaton. They're great at interworking these things together. But essentially, Simo Hayha, when it said a hunter is switching his prey, is because Simo Hayha came from relatively humble beginnings, kind of farming family, was into skiing, was into hunting. And he was a great marksman. He had a great apt at marksmanship. Indeed, I believe that when he was actually doing his military service, his conscription, they said that he could hit targets at extreme distances with like remarkable accuracy and grouping. And so he kind of took those hunting skills and those stalking skills, I suppose, into his military service when the Winter War happened proper, and he wasn't just doing his conscription. And just briefly as well, for those of you who don't know, the Winter War briefly is when the Soviet Union was kind of paranoid over kind of security. Stalingrad, paranoid, never heard that before. But yeah, so he was paranoid about the security, particularly around Leningrad, and he thought that the Finns might allow the Germans to invade the Soviet Union through the Finnish border, and therefore he demanded a large area of the Finnish border stretching all along it for security purposes. Although a lot of sources actually dictate that perhaps the Soviets were actually planning to fully annex all of Finland and kind of set up a puppet state as an even better buffer zone. But funnily enough, when the Soviets demanded the Finns give up all this lands, the Finns refused, and the Soviets took this as a declaration of war. And the war raged for several months, and the Finns, while being extremely outnumbered, I mean, because you're comparing Finland to the Soviet Union, you don't need a history person to tell you that there's a clear imbalance. But despite that, the Finns were actually able to deliver quite a bloody nose to the Soviet Union for all manner of things, with Molotov cocktails, which is where we get them down, named after the Soviet foreign minister Molotov. as well as things like skis. Finns were apt skiers. I mean, you live in a climate like that. You know, we think of Russians in winter, but Finns, and so what the Finns would do is almost like the old-fashioned kind of fast columns. Or flying squadrons, I suppose, in ski form, where the Soviets would be marching along by a road or camping for the night or something like that, and Finns would turn up on their skis, extremely mobile over the snow, and do hit and run attacks and absolutely wreak havoc both in the Soviet line and behind lines. And you know, bearing in mind this is not too long after the officers' purge from Stalin, and so the Red Army at this point is extremely disorganized anyway, and they're fighting an apt enemy on ground that they know. The Russians themselves, for a large part, wasn't actually wearing any type of camouflage. They was wearing like brown coats and overcoats and stuff like that, which stand out, you know, on snow, whereas the Finns were kind of dressed more in sensible colours. And yeah, so that was kind of the Winter War. And although the Soviets technically won the Winter War, they forced the Finns into suing for peace and ceding large areas of the border. The Finns weren't annexed, and they weren't kind of occupied, really. And, you know, to put matters into this account, a high-up Soviet general or official, I can't remember his name or what he was, but I remember the quote vividly, and that he said that the ground that the Soviets actually gained in the Winter War was barely enough to bury their dead. You know, such was the casualties that the Finns were able to inflict on the Soviet Union. And obviously, the Finns would then kind of get some sort of revenge when the Continuation War happened later on. But yeah, so that's Simo Hayha. He started off as I said, as a hunter, and then he used that skill into his kind of military career, I suppose, in his service in the Winter War. But that's the first verse and chorus. Let's get into what the rest of the song has to say.
When morning is broken, snow was white to red. 100 snow tells what happened last night. A tale of a sniper is born. Snowy mouth, hiding his breath. He is steady at hand. Eye to eye, target in sight. The moment to fire has come. Hundreds of kills, a man and his rifle embody the seesaw of things. Stay on sight and cover your head. When he pulls the trigger, you're dead. You're in the sniper's sight. The first hit tonight, time to die. You're in the bullet's way. The white death spray. Say goodbye.
Okay, so I'm going to say this now as well. The chorus is actually quite catchy. But yeah, so as they say, snow in his mouth, and get to that in he had a strange method, or a strange number of methods, which, you know, seem strange but are utterly kind of ingenious. You know, so as I already said, he was a class marksman. He was a good hunter, and he used this to his advantage. And his gun, the rifles that he used was a kind of a Finnish variant of the Mosin Nagant. Only he didn't actually use any sort of telescopic sight or scope, which you usually think of when you say sniper. You think of a scope. And the reason why he didn't do this is for a number of reasons. For one, glass reflects light. And, you know, if the sun shines on a perfect way, all you need to think of is, say, like, if you've seen Indiana Jones, for example, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Indiana Jones is standing on the hill, he's looking through the binoculars at the Nazis in the column, and they see the reflection of the glass. That's what it's like if the sun catches the scope right. And so it gives yourself away. But also another very practical reason is because if you're looking for a scope, you need to raise your head an extra couple of inches or so. And now when you're in a kind of a duel, a firefight, if you will, you know, a couple of inches could be what keeps you from life and death. But also, as the song alluded to, he put snow in his mouth. And the reason for that is, think you're fighting in sub-freezing temperatures. You know, I think they said in some parts of the line, if I can remember, it was like way into like minus 15, minus 20. You know, so extreme cold. And all you need to think of is when it's cold here and you breathe, you see the steam, your breath is visible. But by putting your the snow in his mouth, it meant that his snow wasn't exceeding that kind of steam, which meant he didn't give his position away. I believe he also used to do a similar thing in piling snow mounds around his muzzle, so that, again, a similar thing didn't happen. He didn't give away his position. And so, yeah, a completely ingenious way of fighting. And particularly as well, you need to think he's using iron sights. As I said, not using a scope. So a lot of the people that he's shooting at aren't more than a few hundred meters away, which is well, extreme. And they say a lone man wanders into the wild. Was the lyric of this song, and again, hunting trips. And he racked up, it's not a fabrication when the song says hundreds will die by his gun, because I believe, if I'm correct, estimates put it as, or his superiors rather, not estimates, but his superiors had put him as over 500 kills confirmed of both using his rifle and his sidearm, which, considering that the Winter War only lasted for a handful of months, is an extreme number. You're talking about, tens of people a day. I believe his highest kill count might have been in the 40s for one day. I might be wrong. If I am wrong, then please correct me. And when you put it into the fact that he didn't even serve throughout the entire Winter War, but I'm not going to get into that because the song might include that, so we'll see. There we go. That's the song. So the song didn't mention it, but essentially, such was the kind of nuisance that it was kind of causing in the Russian line. The Soviets resorted to a number of means to try and deal with him. Some included counter snipers. They brought in counter snipers to try and counter him. Sniper duels and stuff like that. Kind of something that resemblance of, say, Enemy at the Gates. If you've seen that film, where you have snipers kind of trying to out duel each other, if you will. And then in some cases as well, artillery fire was even called on sectors that he was believed to be operating in, or where his unit was supposed to be operating in heavier levels in order to try and basically rid him. But eventually something caught up with him, and that was where he was hit in the jaw, and essentially it kind of ripped part of his upper and lower jaw off with some sort of high caliber round. Something that perhaps might have been from like an anti-tank rifle, like a PTRS or something like that, or some sort of 20mm glancing shot or something. I'm not familiar with exactly what done the damage, but I do know it just took away his jaw. But he was able to have several surgeries that in order to kind of enable him to to live a full life, because he did survive the war, he did survive World War II, and he went on to live quite a ripe old age. However, after he got hit in the face, he was hospitalised, and the day that he woke up was when the Soviets signed the kind of peace deal with Finns, ending the Winter War. And then later, when the continuation war happened, by all accounts, Simo Hayha seemed like he wanted to get stuck in again, but he wasn't allowed to. I believe due to his facial injuries. But by all accounts, an extremely humble but efficient man. He never seemed to brag about it. He kept his own diary, which I believe wasn't found until decades after his own death, in which case he spoke about his experiences that he kept with him and tried to estimate the amount of people that he might have killed. And he didn't really brag too much about it. And even on to his later life, when he was interviewed and talking about kind of his experiences in the Winter War and stuff like that, he kind of, again, didn't really embrace the kind of hero or celebrity kind of persona. I believe his most common thing that he would say is that he was just a man doing his duty, which, it's something that I feel like, particularly in this modern generation where wars aren't necessarily, wars are away from, domestic shores for the most part, and even then nothing on the scale of the Second World War. And although World War II, the Winter War was a microcosm of the Second World War, the fighting doesn't mean that it was any less ferocious. And so it's kind of putting yourself in a situation that you can't really ever kind of emphasise with. And hopefully we don't have to emphasise them if peace prevails. Because war is very interesting to talk about on a historical sense, but not too great everywhere else. I don't really know what more I could add. He went on to live a ripe old life after being, I still think, the highest scoring sniper in history, which is, a feat in such a short amount of time. If you take out the actual horrific nature of war, is quite an impressive feat. But that's that. As always, the link to the video will be in the description. I thank you ever so much for watching. If you have any recommendations or any feedback or any things that I missed out, then please leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.